Hello everyone and welcome to the Southern Mountain Kitchen. Today we're going to make my recipe for strip steak with mushrooms and onions. So everything you see on my counter is what we're going to use to make this. There's really not a lot of ingredients. A lot of what we're doing here basically is just the timing of what you're cooking and how you're doing it to get the desired effect for the steak. We really don't want to take the steak straight from the refrigerator and cook it. So it needs to come out and actually be at room temperature for at least 20 some minutes or whatever, just to actually start this process before we get going. Because if it's cold, it's not going to cook up well. It's like a lot of things with meat. I believe you need to bring it up to temperature before you cook it, just for the sake of. So we're going to take our steak and we're going to drizzle this with some olive oil, and you can just put enough on top of this to coat it. And once you get it drizzled on top, you can take a fork and just move it around a little bit. Make sure the entire top of this gets coated, because it's important to get an area of this wet enough so that way all of our seasoning is going to stick to it. So we are adding to this at least a tablespoon of steak seasoning, which mine was Memphis steak seasoning. You can use any kind you want on this. That's perfectly fine. And then we're going to add at least a half a teaspoon of salt and a half a teaspoon of pepper. Get that spread around evenly. And then we are going to use 1 tablespoon of minced garlic, which we're going to divvy up between the two of these. Now there's going to be some left in my bowl. That's reserved for later on when we're actually cooking our mushrooms and onions. So no, I didn't just get too much of it out of there. That's actually being held to the side for a reason. So once you get these seasonings all on top of here, including your garlic, we're going to spread them around, make sure that they're pressed into the steak, so that way when you go to cook it, it has a fair chance of staying on the steak. And that's part of why the olive oil is there. We want to really keep these where we put them as far as seasoning and the garlic and everything. And we're going to let this sit on the counter for at least 20 minutes, like I said, before we start working with this. Now we're going to take like a small to medium onion. It depends on how much you like the onions. And we're going to cut it into rings, and then we're basically going to break these up before we even get started. So that way, once they go in the pan, they have a fair chance of cooking evenly. So go ahead and break them up, push them to the side, and then we have 8 ounces of mushrooms. And if you're like, wow, that's a lot of mushrooms. Well, it really isn't, because when mushrooms cook, they cook down. So they're going to shrink a little when they're cooking, and you want to cut these kind of on the healthy side, so that way when they do cook, they don't shrivel up into nothing. Because if we're going to eat mushrooms, you want to taste the mushrooms. So go ahead and cut them up completely, and make sure that you've gone through all of them. And please, when you get your mushrooms, wash them before you do this, because sometimes those things that come out of those little blue containers are not always clean. So in a small to medium pan, you're going to add 2 tablespoons of butter and a little bit of olive oil, and we're going to mix this around in here until we get to the point where the butter is melting. So go ahead and move it around. You want to bring this up to at least a medium high temperature, and move this around until we get to a point where it's mostly melted. And then we're going to start adding in our onions. Now once the onions are in here, we're going to let these cook for at least 3 to 4 minutes, because we want to make sure that they're starting to actually cook through before we add anything else to this, because the other things we're going to add don't take as long to cook, and we really don't want a situation to where we overcook something else just for the sake of the onions. So after you've had them in there for like 3 to 4 minutes, then we're going to add in our mushrooms. Now when you're cooking the mushrooms, you probably don't need a lot of time with them on this. You might go for about 3 minutes or so, maybe 4 at the most. But you're going to notice as the mushrooms start to cook, they're going to start to change color a little bit, and they're going to actually shrink a little. And that's when you're going to know that they're actually getting done. So while they're in the pan with the onions, go ahead and move them around with your spatula or whatever. So that way any of these that might be stacked on top of each other have a fair chance to cook, and you can move them down underneath to where you actually have your butter and your oil. So go ahead and flip these around a little bit as they go. And as I said, once they're in there, at least 3 minutes. So as you're watching them, you're going to notice the color start to change. And that is what you're looking for. And it's going to be a definite change, because once you get to it, the mushrooms are going to go from kind of like a white to kind of an off-white to almost even a beigeish color. That's when you're going to know that you're getting to that point and they're being done right. So continue to stir them as you go, and they'll end up looking something like this. And this is when you know you've gotten to the point where you're pretty much done with that. So what we're going to do is we're going to take that other tablespoon of minced garlic and add it to this. And we're only going to let this cook for like a minute. We're not trying to overcook anything else because of it. And minced garlic cooks up really quickly when you have a hot skillet. So get that into there, stir it up, so that way the minced garlic works its way to the bottom and it can actually get seared into everything else. And when we're done with this, we're going to remove this from the heat, set it to the side, and it's going to wait for the steak. So basically everything here is already going to be cooked and it's going to be waiting for us to use. So go ahead and stir it up a little bit before it's removed. And in a minute, we're going to move over to our steaks. Now, as you're moving this around, you're going to know your garlic is done when everything in your kitchen starts to smell like garlic and onions. But anyway, so we're taking a large skillet now. And as you notice, I'm using cast iron in this. I think cast iron does such a good job at cooking steak, but I also used it with the mushrooms and onions and everything else. So just personal preference, but I think it does a really good job. So in this, we added about 2 to 3 tablespoons of olive oil and 2 tablespoons of butter. And we're going to get this butter melting. And this is going to let us know when the temperature is hot enough in this pan, because as the butter's melting, you know you've got heat. So put it on a medium high, get that butter going, start it melting, and then we'll get ready to put our pieces of steak into this. If your temperature is hot enough for the steak to go in, it's not going to take any time for this butter to be gone. So that's a good telltale thing to tell you, okay, we're getting close. Now, the whole time we were doing everything else with the mushrooms and onions and all that, it was giving time for the steak to sit and not only absorb some of the flavor from the seasoning we put into it, but also you're definitely at room temperature. So go ahead and add your steaks in. You want to put them in seasoned side up. And we're going to let this stay for about a minute or so, whatever. We're just trying to do a little bit of a heat on the bottom of it to sear it slightly. We're not trying to like overcook this or do anything weird with it. We're just trying to give it like a minute or so, just so the bottom changes color before we flip it over. Now, when you have your steaks in your pan, it's probably good to move them back and forth so that they don't really stick or anything like that. For cast iron, you usually won't have a problem with that. And with the fact that I put oil and butter in there, you shouldn't have a problem with it. But go ahead and move them around a little bit, and then when you're ready, flip them over, and this is what you're going for on the bottom side of the steak. Now, while you've got it like this, we're going to cook this for about 5 minutes with the seasoned side down, so that way, as you can see, it's seared in the actual seasoning, the garlic, everything that we had, and you get this really neat edge on it where everything's going brownish on the edge of your steak. That's what you want. So when you flip it, we're going to do another 5 minutes on the other side. So that way that's going to start to sear. And this is going to cook it in. Now, when you have it to this point where you have the unseasoned side down, move the steak around the pan, because some of the seasoning from the other side, when you had it down, had already come off in the pan and it's mixed in with the butter and oil. And as you move the steak around, you're going to get some of that onto the bottom part. And it's actually going to flavor it as you're doing this. So any of the stuff that's actually in the pan itself will collect on the bottom of the steak. So move them around, cook them, and you can flip these as you feel necessary until you see a point where they're nice, evenly done. Now, you can cook these to whatever temperature you want, however you want it. If you want it rare, medium, well done. A medium steak, if you check the temperature on it, it's about 140 degrees internally. I'm going for a medium to well done. So mine is going to be a little darker on the outside than other people's would have been. If you're doing rare, it wouldn't get nearly as dark as this. However, you're going to do this per taste. And especially if you're cooking these things, and you can have any size steak you want, whatever you want to do. It's just however you want to eat it. So now we're going to plate what we cooked. So put the steak on the plate, and then we're going to bring back those mushrooms and onions and the garlic and put them around the plate just to the edge of the steak. And that way, once these are on here, you are pretty much ready to eat. You can add like rolls with this. You could have a salad with it. You could have whatever you want. But this is what we're going for. And this has the best taste because you've really cooked it into this meat. And it's such a great flavor and so well cooked that it's just a pleasure to eat. I hope you liked this video. If you did, please like and subscribe. And if you get a chance, check out the Southern Mountain Kitchen website where you can get a free recipe. You can check out the cookbooks that are available from the Southern Mountain Kitchen. And then you can also purchase books cheaper than what you could in a regular bookstore because you get a discount from me for whatever you order. And while you're there, you get cheaper shipping than Amazon. Have a great day.